You're listening to
and such a short amount of time to do it in. We were really
a Mamamia podcast.
It's February 21, 2007, and Britney Spears is sitting in her white Mercedes at a petrol station in LA. She's been out driving, trying to visit her two sons who now live with their father, Kevin Federline. As she sits in the driver's seat, she notices men with cameras get out of their cars. They've been following her for hours. But now, they're swarming around her car, capturing her every move. And then it happens. Britney gets out of the car and her face starts contorting with rage. She begins wielding a large green umbrella.
No, guys, please, guys, don't do this. No.
Reporters would later say her teeth were clenched as she sprinted towards the press pack. Many photographers ran. When Britney couldn't hit them, she made straight for a car. An SUV owned by one of LA's most notorious paparazzos, a guy called Daniel Ramos. A day later, Britney Spears checked back into rehab, but not before the paparazzos had sold the photographs to the highest bidder.
And those become, these cult pictures, the umbrella pictures, which I think sold for $400,000.
From Mamamia, you're listening to No Filter, a podcast where people from all walks of life tell their stories very candidly and aren't afraid to be vulnerable. My name is Mia Friedman. And the story of Britney Spears is one that I'm guessing you're pretty familiar with. Child star from a small town makes it big in the city, only to grow up in front of the cameras, turn into a pop showbiz celebrity icon, and then break down from the pressure and become tabloid fodder. Lots of tabloid fodder, from marriages to divorces to a shaved head to her now contested conservatorship. So what actually happened to Britney Spears?
Her marriage had broken down. She had temporarily had her children taken away from her, and she was being stalked day and night by 100 men who would not leave her alone.
Pandora Sykes is a British journalist and broadcaster, and she's the host of BBC4's new audio documentary series, Pieces of Britney. In this series, she pieces together what we know about Britney's story and also what it tells us more broadly about sex, entertainment, and how we treat very, very famous women. And just a note, this episode was recorded a week before Britney's father, Jamie, decided to step down as conservator of his daughter's estate after 13 years. Pandora, my first question is why? Why Britney Spears? You're 34, she's 39, so you're around the same age. I guess, was she very formative for you growing up?
I think when anyone in their 30s thinks of Britney Spears, they do think of that really particular time, which is that time that I wanted to capture on the podcast, which is that confluence of celebrity gossip exploding on the internet and in magazines, the paparazzi becoming this absolute force to be reckoned with, and also this time of very female-centric pop culture. When I think about that time, I don't really think about any dudes. I think about Britney Spears and Misha Barton and Lindsay Lohan and Sienna Miller and Kate Moss actually as well, but that's more like in a fashion way. She was very kind of popular. I mean, has always been really popular. So she kind of, captured this moment in time, I think, and the pressures and the forces that shaped that moment in time in pop culture, at least.
You speak on the podcast about how it was very much when she came onto the scene. Can you talk about what kind of cultural moment we were in, particularly in America, and talk about that photo shoot that she did, that iconic photo shoot in Rolling Stone, and how those two things were just so contrasted?
So Britney released her first single in 1998. And to put that in context, the Spice Girls came along in 1996. And a lot of other bands were coming out in kind of 2000. So she was like bang in the middle, but it was very like band time. There weren't a lot of solo artists. Now, when we think about Beyonce was in Destiny's Child at the time, and there was Aaliyah. But beyond that, there wasn't a huge amount of female solo artists. So she really did have kind of, the stage was hers for the taking. And she came along at this particularly interesting time in the US because it was the post-Clinton years. And a lot of the nation had been really scandalized by his affair with Monica Lewinsky. And the pendulum kind of swung away from this, I suppose, sexual time to this moment of Puritanism with sex ed in schools going back to abstinence only. Although I did find out the other day that 26 states in the US still teach abstinence only sex education, which means that the only sex education they taught is just don't have sex.
Cross your legs.
And when Bush came in 2000, he promised to kind of bring dignity back to a scandal-torn White House. So he very much came with the premise of kind of clearing it up. It was also post-AIDS as well, so there was a real fear around sex. But there was also kind of this new mood, and there's a journalist called David Friend who writes about it really well in the naughty 90s, where he writes about all these kind of pop culture phenomenons, can never say that word, like booty calls and hookups and the little blue pill, which is Viagra, and the rabbit, the vibrator, and thongs. I don't know if you remember then, but my sister's a similar age to you, and she wore thongs all the time. It was like no other underwear existed.
Yeah, it was true. And we kidded ourselves that they were really comfy. It was such a weird time.
So weird. And she wore them like every day for 2 years. And then she was like, what the hell? But they were like a really enormous kind of lingerie trend. So Britney came along and she kind of encompassed all these ideas. She was this sexy schoolgirl, which is obviously uncomfortable in itself, this really sexy girl that men could fancy, but she also promised to be a virgin till she was married. So puritanical America and mothers of young children absolutely latched onto her as this kind of icon for the post-Clinton America. And the interview that you're talking about that she did, one of her most iconic, was with Rolling Stone magazine when she was 17, and it was photographed in her childhood home in Kentwood, Louisiana. And she's in her bedroom. On the front cover, she's lying on, I think, like a bed of teddies, and she's in her underwear hugging a Teletubby, which again is that very precise moment in time when I remember I put Teletubbies down on my Christmas list. I don't know why anyone over the age of 3 wanted a Teletubby, but they were kind of cool in the same way that like Buzz Lightyear was also cool, and Furbies. And the interview itself was, I think, almost worse than the photographs, because it was all about her honeyed thigh and her bottom poking out of her little shorts and her sort of, her baby girl face. And it wasn't just Rolling Stone that did it. In 2000, British GQ had a picture of Britney on their cover where they'd actually, and so much more of a hoo-ha would have been made of it now, the photographer Nigel Parry recently shared the photograph that he had taken and submitted to British GQ, where she's wearing a white button-down shirt. But British GQ, their end, undid a few more buttons and pumped up her boobs, and then put as the cover line, "Thank heaven for little girls."
Oh, yeah, right.
I think that kind of shows that tension. And there have been endless debates about whether or not that was a marketing decision so that she would appeal to the maximum audiences, basically dads and kids, whether or not it was a kind of deliberately provocative decision, because obviously tensions, they can't last, but if you can kind of occupy attention, then you can get so much chatter around you. Or whether or not she ever meant to stay a virgin until she was married. Maybe that was just a kind of a convenient line to trot out. I think she did. I think she was a teenager, and I think she was enjoying the pantomime of being sexy. But as the brilliant Peggy Orenstein, the author of Girls and Sex, said, it was a bait and switch message, in that, she would say one thing and then do another. And I don't think it can last saying, I'm going to be really sexy on stage and in photographs, but when I'm not on stage, I'm not being photographed, I'm just a normal girly girl. I do think teenagers like the pantomime of being sexy. I don't think she was doing anything that most other, or a lot of other teenagers offered a global platform would have done.
How did her virginity even become an interview question? Like, you know, it's so funny looking back at it through, and that's very much what Pieces of Britney does, looks back as a cultural reappraisal of how we treat women, as you've said, famous or otherwise. But this idea of asking her if she's a virgin, how did that even happen?
Do you know what? I don't know the first time it ever came out that Britney wanted to be a virgin until she was married. Whether or not she was asked it or she just said when talking about being sexy on stage, look, I like being sexy on stage, but I want to be a virgin until I'm married. You know, she was religious, so maybe it was in the context of her being religious. I'm not sure exactly when it started, but it did become an absolute global obsession, especially when it was revealed that she was going out with Justin Timberlake. And she'd actually been going out with him for a few years by the time they shared that news publicly. And what I found so extraordinary looking back is the range of people that asked her about it. Because you think, oh, okay, that will just be like the really red top sort of tabloids that will ask
And the
her
Howard
that.
Sterns and the shock jocks. And
the Howard Sterns, who, I mean, there's some really, you know, awful archive footage when it comes to him and Britney and how he, you know, says that he's just going to masturbate on air while they talk about her, which is just so extraordinary and disgusting. Yeah, she was asked about it at press conferences. There's one that I just found so ridiculous where she's asked by this very well-spoken journalist for Reuters, which is a financial and business publication.
oh my God.
You know, if they can have a status update on her virginity. And I think now people try and equate someone to who Britney was then. So they will say, well, that is Billie Eilish or it's Taylor Swift. And actually it's none of them because there really wasn't anyone else like Britney at that time. She was kind of Taylor and Billie and Beyonce and Olivia Rodrigo and Demi Lovato and Zendaya. And she was like 10 pop culture titans in one. And I think because she'd started talking about it, you know, she'd opened this can of worms. It is still bizarre to me that so many people asked her about it. But even Oprah, who is, you know, a more liberal talk show host and was definitely largely on Britney's side, for want of a better word, you know, when she asked her about her virginity, she would say, you know, you don't need to tell anyone if that changes. You really don't. I'm telling you, you don't need to tell anyone if that changes.
Do you wish you'd never said anything about the virginity thing because it's going to follow you to wedding night?
I kind of wish, I kind of do, because when I go overseas, you know, they'll ask you questions about it, and it's just something that's there, and you can't help it, you know. But no, I'm gonna try. I'm gonna try to stick to what I said and see, you know.
And do you think it's anybody's business if you do or don't? You say because you're gonna try. So does that mean like if you decide not to?
No, it's for me, you know.
Yeah, I think it's for you to decide.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Which was really comforting to hear. But at the same time, she would still try and catch Britney out when Britney was talking about her and Justin. There's a clip where she says, you know, she's talking about how there was a rumor that her and Justin were married. And she says, I woke up and I said to him, baby, she goes, hold on, you woke up? And she says, yeah, I woke up in my hotel room and I called him. Oprah wasn't trying to be mean, but, you know, she was still, like everyone, looking for the scoop.
You've observed that she was the first pop star of the internet age. How did that actually transpire?
So Britney came along when mass internet was kind of unrolling across households. So rather than it being something you just had at 2 desks in the IT room at school or the public library, we were all able to access it from our homes, which had a massive impact on how celebrities were covered. The paparazzi suddenly became this enormous force to be reckoned with, and it was the gold rush of paparazzi years because suddenly all these publications needed a lot of content, and they realized that visual works really well, particularly online. And that's when all these celebrity gossip blogs popped up, like Lainey Gossip, which is still going, Perez Hilton, which is still going, Holy Moly, which is folded, Gawker. And then obviously tons of others, like Pop Culture died in 2009, lots of other smaller ones. And the focus of a lot of those gossip blogs was Britney, and also because the OC was an enormous thing at the time, Misha Barton, Lindsay Lohan. I can't even really remember what she was doing at that time. If it was Mean Girls, I think it was probably Mean Girls actually that was coming out at that time. But also she was, you know, a big party girl. Paris Hilton as kind of, she was sort of an it girl, but she was also really poppy and fashiony. She wasn't kind of locked away in her ivory tower being very society. The internet really latched onto this clutch of women and treated them pretty badly to be honest. But also the internet did put rocket launchers into Britney's career as well. I wonder if she would have become as popular as she did so quickly without the internet. She was the most searched term on Google for 7 years, bar, I think, 2004, which is an extraordinary legacy. No one else has come close to that. I actually don't know who it's been the last few years. I suspect Trump and Obama would be up there.
Or the Kardashians, because this was also a pre-Kardashian world. And it's interesting when you think about the Kardashians and the it girls of now, they're very controlled and controlling of their images to the point of, you know, threatening to sue people who publish an unretouched photo of them. So it was a real moment in time pre that, wasn't it? When you never saw the Kardashians or you never see the Kardashians out and messy. But you would constantly see that group of women out and messy, just like I suppose most or many young women, you know, who are partying and having a good time. But I wanted to ask you about the slut shaming, because after this whole, you know, wholesome virgin, sexy virgin, after she broke up with Justin and he was goaded by a radio host to admit that they'd slept together.
And I just want to ask you one question. Did you Britney Spears? Yes or no?
Oh, man.
Come on, man.
Okay, I did it. No.
He then made that video that implied that she cheated on him. What happened then?
There's a lot of people in the Free Britney movement who really, really despise Justin Timberlake. And I spoke to a few of them, and they really see him as kind of the architect of reputational demise, really, that he just absolutely destroyed everything she'd built because it was so key, in a way it shouldn't be, but it was so key to her reputation that she was not a sexual girl. And he outed her, and she spent years clearing that up, really, whereas for him, it just absolutely propelled him away from this kind of quite nerdy boy bander into this really sexy solo artist. And part of his mythology became that he'd taken Britney's virginity. And it's a really, really sad, uncomfortable thing, I think, to look back on. And he's since apologized, but in that really nebulous way that really annoys me, when he says, I benefited from a society that, you know, upholds privileged white men, rather than just saying,
I threw her under the bus.
I really screwed up at that time. Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a lot of chat around their breakup as to whether or not she cheated on him. And there was a kind of almost like a sort of A-list Jerry Springer played out through music videos, where he did a music video for Cry Me a River, which was such an anthem. I remember when I was 15. And there is a Britney lookalike in that. And she responded, there was an unwritten rule that no songwriters could submit songs about Britney's personal life. But she co-wrote a song in response to him that was very much kind of an answer song. And you've got Stephen Dorff in the video. And it's quite weird. She's also a baby, and then she dies and kind of is reborn. And a lot of people said, well, that's maybe her being reborn as a woman that is now sexually emancipated. Yeah, it only really brought kind of strife on her. And she's since said, and she even said really at the time, I was really heartbroken, and she sought solace in partying. And as you said, the narrative was not so controlled at that time. I have been thinking a lot about why Britney got it a lot more. And I don't think it's that no one was controlled at that time, because Destiny's Child and the Spice Girls, also the girls in those bands weren't really photographed. However, they were in a band. So they had each other. They had that solidarity. They had one another to say, don't go out tonight. You are so miserable. Stay in and we'll look after you. Her peers at that time, even though they did really different things, were Paris Hilton and Lindsay Lohan. And Paris Hilton had a series of really nasty boyfriends who were actually really horrible about Lindsay Lohan. And even Paris would call Britney the animal. That was kind of a public nickname. So it was this quite kind of triptych of women. And there's a photograph of all three of them in the car, which has become quite iconic, in the New York Post. And they headlined it, the Bimbo Summit. And I think the slut shaming, because she really didn't date that many people, but anyone she did date would come and do a kiss and tell, or like Fred Durst from Blink 182 would go on to Howard Stern's show and be quizzed about dating her. And it wasn't just kind of the slut shaming. There was a real kind of focus and shaming of her being, you know, a hillbilly. Howard Stern would say, so you were with all of her hillbilly friends. And she went on Jay Leno and he said, you know, where do you want to be when you're 25? And she said, oh, I'd like to have a couple of children. And he says, on a trailer park or something like that.
Oh my
and
God.
Why would she be on a trailer park? But there was that real trailer trash narrative, which actually only built when she then married her second husband, not her Vegas wedding. Her second husband, because he was also from a working class background. And that's, you know, possibly part of the reason why they bonded in Extraordinary Hollywood. But that's when as well the trailer trash narrative really stepped up.
There was also in a lot of those interviews a real obsession with her enjoyment of sex, like that she was a sexual animal and that she was, you know, these marathon sex sessions, which was very odd and twisted in a way. Like the obsession, not the fact that she was interested in sex. It was like the next level of her slut shaming after the fact that she dared lose her virginity before marriage.
I think it was all part of the fantasy that sold newspapers. So all of those newspapers at the time were just doing crazy, crazy sales. And I interviewed the past showbiz editor at The Sun about it, where he, you know, talks about kind of the economics of it and just how wildly profitable celebrity scandal and kiss and tells were. But kiss and tells were a huge thing in the noughties. Less so now, I think, because they're kind of deemed a bit gross.
We sort of call it revenge porn now a little bit, don't we?
There's definitely an element of that, isn't there? But you could earn so much from a kiss and tell. So anytime she slept with anyone, there were, you know, say a model or a dancer, and he would say, oh, she seemed so sad, but she, you know, romped for hours. That was always the narrative. Yeah. It always followed the same template. It was always that she was really sad and that she romped for hours. But I don't think kiss and tells tend to ever be, oh, she didn't really like sex and we only had sex for 5 minutes and then we watched TV. Like, they always tend to subscribe to the same sort of format. There doesn't seem to be really any in between, which I think says a lot about where culture was at that time. She went from being a virgin to being sex obsessed. I remember at that time, American culture started coming across to the UK. We started getting Abercrombie and Fitch and American channels on Sky. And, you know, it was possible for us to watch The OC and Friends and Sex and the City. And you started being able to get American sweets. And there was this kind of real mass import of American, not just products and produce, but also trends. And I mean, it was, I think, so distressing for the teenage girl. And I only really realized that in hindsight. But fashion at that time, everything was very sexy. It wasn't sexual. Like Paris Hilton was very sexy in her kind of very low slung jeans and her crop tops. And, you know, that slogan that she became famous for in The Simple Life, like, I love it. Do you love it? Like, even the way she said it was just so kind of devoid of sensuality. So I think Britney was also there at that time where there was this real confusion over what kind of sexiness and being sexual meant. And I can remember wearing like very sexy clothes age 15. I mean, kudos to my mum for letting me kind of explore through fashion, which I, you know, kind of really shocks me looking back on it. Miss 60 was huge at that time. Really, really, really low slung jeans, thongs on display, crop tops. And I think, you know, it was a time culturally where eating disorders were really prevalent. There were a lot of very popular and trend shaping people in the public eye at that time who were very, very, very thin. 00 time.
It was that real emaciated hip bones.
It was kind of really glitzy, like it was trashy fashion, which now is coming back. You know, juicy couture is coming back again, and crystal crop tops in a kind of ironic way. I can't bring myself to do it again second time round, but I do have friends who are really embracing that noughties trend again. So I think it went kind of the whole way across pop culture. But yeah, definitely it went from 0 to 60. But Britney's whole career kind of went from 0 to 60.
Was there a time when she was in control? Because obviously she started when she was 17. She'd been a child star, Mickey Mouse Club. Her parents were not well educated. They were not experienced in the ways of Hollywood and fame and the music industry. Was there a time when she took control of her career, when her power was at its height? Or were there always people pulling the strings?
I think one of the myths around Britney is that she was just a puppet. And certainly people took advantage and they manipulated her. And obviously the conservatorship is just the apex of her being taken advantage of. But she definitely had strong opinions about her career. And a lot of people I interviewed who worked with her when she was coming up were very clear that, Britney knew exactly who she was and what she wanted to do, whether or not it was her choreographer on the Mickey Mouse Club, Miles Thorogood, or Nigel Dick, who directed her first music video, which was Baby One More Time, and then her fourth, I think it was, which is Oops, I Did It Again. And he said, both times she chose the outfit that she wore. For Baby One More Time, they'd planned to have this kind of like Power Rangers theme. And she'd said, no, that's not cool. That's not cool. That's not sexy. Teenage girls don't like that. I'm going to wear a school uniform. And Nigel was really nervous about that. And he sort of tried to persuade her out of it, but she was absolutely not for turning. So he thought, okay, all right, well, we'll go with that. And he was nervous again with Oops, I Did It Again.
Which was the red catsuit.
That amazingly iconic latex catsuit and her very hair straightened hair, because GHD hair straighteners were just massive at that time. And she looked incredible, but yeah, he was really nervous again. And he thinks that in expressing his hesitancy that she was going, he says, I felt like she was going from 0 to 60. I felt like she was putting out this very sexy image and she was a young girl. And I was worried what people would seize upon with that. But he thinks by expressing those fears that that's possibly why he was never booked again. I think people, because it's easier for us to understand it, but I think what people like to think is she was quite literally dressed by these drooling music execs in their 50s, like wear this sexy top, wear these sexy jeans, go out there and dance. And that's not how it was. I wouldn't say it was a total collusion, but she was definitely more of a participant in the building of her image. What I don't think she was a participant in is that kind of constant deconstruction of her by the media. But she absolutely wanted to be sexy. Even in that kind of disastrous VMA performance, which was kind of seen as the beginning of the end, when she's about to have her children taken away, and it's just awful, it's devastating, and she should never have been allowed on stage. She's wearing underwear and knee-high boots, and she meant to be wearing a dress, but she at the last minute said, I don't want to wear this dress. And I think it's because she was so vulnerable at that time and feeling like she'd completely lost her footing. And so she sort of went back to that place of, okay, if I'm just sexy on stage, then that's me. That's part of who Britney is. Britney is sexy on stage. So if I don't know who I am and I don't know how I can pull this together, I'll go out there in my underwear and that will be enough. So I think she was naive in many ways, but she absolutely was not just a doll being pushed and pulled in all aspects.
I'm Mia Friedman and you're listening to No Filter with Pandora Sykes, all about Britney Spears. The night of the umbrella. It's so iconic. Those photos, it's one of those things I remember where I was when I saw them, and I remember not feeling as sad as I should and as I would now, and not feeling that I wanted to look away, because I didn't. We all just wanted to see more. What's the story behind that night and where she was at? She'd already shaved her head. How did she come to be smashing a paparazzi car with an umbrella?
I think so many of us now look back at seeing those pictures and think, why did we not question that a bit more? I just accepted that Britney was crazy.
Yeah.
As a teenage girl, I would read all of the headlines about her and, Heat magazine, and I would think, she's had a meltdown, she's gone crazy. This is what women look like when they go crazy. Although now, of course, you look back and you think, wow, a lot of women were going crazy at that time. Were they actually going crazy? So she'd gone to try and see her children, and her estranged husband, Kevin Federline, hadn't let her in to see them. When she was really distraught, she used to sort of roam around at night in her car. And she said that's because she thought there would be less paparazzi around at that time. But I think actually at that point, she was just very lonely and lost. She didn't really have an entourage at that time. She'd pretty much fired everyone. She didn't have a manager. She didn't have a stylist. She didn't have a driver. She didn't have a publicist. She had absolutely no one. Her team almost became the paparazzi. I mean, she then went on to date one of them, a guy called Adnan Galib. It became, totally sort of meta and enmeshed. And so she couldn't see her children. She was driving around. She then pleads with the paparazzi to leave her alone. And she's normally very friendly with them, but she asks them to F off. And then she hits the car of one of the paparazzis with an umbrella. And those become, these cult pictures, the umbrella pictures, which I think sold for 400,000. And I interviewed this psychologist called Karen Dill Shackelford, who said that actually Britney's response to the intense pressure she was under, her marriage had broken down, she had temporarily had her children taken away from her, and she was being stalked day and night by 100 men who would not leave her alone. She said her response to that, which is to shave her head, which apparently she'd been wanting to do for several months. And we do know that women at points of enormous change or crisis change their hair. Shaving your head. I think now we don't think that a woman shaving her head is such a dramatic act as then. But then it was kind of, a rejection of her femininity, of her sort of Britney iconography. But anyway, Karen said that hitting this car with an umbrella was actually a really mild reaction to what she was going through. But we saw it as a meltdown rather than this woman going through this extreme period of stress. And it's sort of a meltdown that she was never allowed to recover from, because shortly after that, she is taken into 2 temporary psychiatric holds, the second of which is turned into a temporary conservatorship, which quickly is made permanent in 2009. And obviously she's been in that for 13 years.
Let's talk about her relationship with her mum and dad. What was it like during her fame before things started to unravel? I imagine, they had no money. She was suddenly enormously wealthy. The power balance changes pretty quickly in those scenarios, I would imagine.
So growing up, she had a difficult relationship with her dad, who by all accounts was a difficult man. He'd had a troubled upbringing himself. His mother had shot herself dead on the grave of his baby brother when he was 14 years old. And when Britney was growing up, he'd had money struggles, he'd gone bankrupt, and he struggled with alcohol, and he'd had periods of being estranged from her mother, Lynn. Lynn and her were very close. Britney started kind of entering national singing competitions at 9. She did Star Search, I think. And she got an agent when she was pretty young, and then did the Mickey Mouse Club from the ages of, I think it was 10 to 12. And of course, we now know that she did it alongside luminaries like Justin Timberlake and Christina Aguilera and Kerry Russell. And her mother and her relocated for that. So they lived apart from her father and her brother during that time. And Lynn has always been very keen to stress that she was not a mummager, as Kris Jenner then christened it, that she didn't take any of Britney's money and that she didn't push Britney to be famous. That was what Britney wanted. Who knows really the truth of that relationship? But certainly Lynn, she's never been a conservator for Britney. Jamie, her father, has always been the co-conservator, and they seem to come together at certain times. Certainly it is largely believed that Jamie and Lynn both wanted Britney to be in a conservatorship.
Why did they want that? Because they were worried she was going to lose all her money and there wasn't going to be any left?
There's lots of theories. I mean, Britney is now worth, I think, $60 million. And lots of people say, well, she should be worth more like 300 or 400 because that's what Taylor Swift and J-Lo and all her other contemporaries are worth. Jamie and the conservatorship claim that before she was put in a conservatorship, she was only worth $2.8 million, that she was spending her money like water. Critics of that say she can spend her money however she wants. So one theory is that she was spending all her money. Another was that they were genuinely very worried about her mental health. And then, of course, the other is that it was a totally cynical move to control her. There's a manager, she had a manager called Sam Lutfi, who the Spears had a very uncomfortable relationship with. They saw him as the reason why she would no longer see them, because she'd stopped talking to them for a couple of months before she was put in a conservatorship, and she'd cut off all of her friends and family. And they saw him as this very dangerous force in her life. And he did have a reputation. He had about 5 restraining orders against him. And he then went on to be Courtney Love's manager. So he did really have this reputation for approaching vulnerable women and sort of inveigling himself into their lives. But yeah, one theory is that the Spears put Britney or wanted Britney to be in a conservatorship to keep her away from Sam Lutfi, that they were really worried about his influence. He's always maintained his innocence. And also, he did then win eventually a court case for damages against them, I think in 2016. So it rolled on for years and years and years. But they were really at loggerheads over Britney. As for why it lasted so long, I mean, this is the big question now. But once you are put in a conservatorship, it's very, very hard to get out of one. And in the States, there's no auditing of them. There's no like national body for guardianships. I mean, there are various bodies like the National Association for kind of petitioning against malpractice in guardianships. I'm paraphrasing because I can't remember the name of the entire body, but the US and the states themselves don't keep tabs on how many conservatorships there are, which means you've got no way of auditing them every year. And so Britney's just rolled on, even though, as we now know, it was voluntary. Well, I mean, I always knew it was voluntary, and I could not work out if it was voluntary, why she was still in it. And then, of course, she recently revealed that she didn't know it was voluntary. And then you saw this mass wave of people resigning.
Before she spoke out and before some of the things came to light over the last few months in 2021, do you think public opinion was more sympathetic towards the conservatorship? Because you look at her Instagram and you look at her behaviour around the time when she went into the conservatorship. So even what you said about she'd fired her manager, she had no publicist, she had no driver, she was driving around. Like when you're a globally famous multimillionaire pop star, that doesn't seem like a very well way to manage your career or your life. So there was a sense that this is for her own good. Like it's sad, but she's not able to be in charge. But then you look at Kanye, and he's been put in involuntary holds a number of times as well, and he ran for president after that.
I mean, Kanye it's a different time now.
And it's a man?
And it's a man, and he's older. Britney was only 26 when she was put in a conservatorship. But yes, a lot of people have asked, how is this happening with women? I mean, it wasn't a secret that she was in one. I think the truth was there wasn't a huge amount of attention on Britney in that time. She was doing her Vegas residencies from 2013 to 2017. And, the thing is if she had been happy to be in that conservatorship, if she had said, this is absolutely what I want, this is for my own good, I don't feel capable of navigating any part of my life off stage. Because there is, again, I spoke to several psychologists, because what a lot of people have said is, okay, if she's incapable of managing her own life, how is she doing a Vegas residency for 4 years that's turned over 120 million? And to which some psychologists said, well, being on stage might be the place where she feels safe. It's an incredibly controlled surrounding in Vegas. She didn't do meet and greets. She did the same thing every night. She was on stage, but you could be, shepherded on stage and off stage. She could be kept really safe while still doing the things she loved.
Makes her sound like a trained seal, doesn't it? Like a performing animal in a show.
She'd spoken on For the Record, which is this documentary she did, which is largely seen as this like piece of PR or this corrective. She was actually in a conservatorship at that time, but it was kind of seen as a corrective to those umbrella pictures. where she spoke about getting her life back on track. And she said, you know, that dancing, and she says this on her Instagram, you know, dancing is her therapy. It's where she has always felt free. And she'd been doing it since a really young age. And she's also spoken about how she realized if she started singing and dancing as a 5-year-old, that people would stop fighting, that she could, you know, make everyone happy. So it's really built into her psychology what dancing and singing offers her and what it does to other people. So various psychologists have said, well, actually she could have been capable of being on stage while still needing a high level of support. Of course, a high level of support doesn't necessarily mean a conservatorship. So I think people assumed that she was happy. I mean, as I said, it was a voluntary conservatorship. She was still working. She was doing the X Factor. And then Simon Cowell, you know, said afterwards, oh, she didn't really speak. And now in hindsight, you think, well, why were you not questioning why she might not have spoken? You know, what drugs was she on? What kind of control was she under?
When you look back at some of that time during the conservatorship, in those early years particularly, she was doing her residency. I went back and she did interviews, she did shoots, she was on the cover of Rolling Stone again, looking amazing, and it was like the narrative was Britney's back. What's happened in the last few years? Like, what changed, do you think? Because now she looks dishevelled on her social media. She seems a little bit incoherent or childlike at times. She seems very altered in the videos that she makes on her Instagram. She talks very, very fast, has this baby voice. She's refusing to perform again. What changed?
The conservatorship only really came under scrutiny in 2009 because of a few things that came out. Allegedly, this paralegal left an anonymous voicemail for the 2 comedians who run the Britney's Gram podcast. And a series of videos came out on TikTok in 2020 by her former kind of in-house photographer and art director, Andrew Gallery, who said she'd written him a letter. So various things started coming to light that she wasn't happy. She said in court in her testimony, which was, the 23rd of June, so just over a month ago, that she had been put on drugs against her will, that she had been put on lithium, which has effects on your speech and on your mobility. And some people said the various ways in which she presented herself, you could see now that she had been on that. She didn't want to be on that. She was very happy with the medication that she was on before. I don't know as to what state she is in right now or her Instagram videos, and I don't really like to speculate. I think we also have to remember that she's now in this insane time of kind of 2006 style attention. All of the eyes of the world are on her again, which could be making her feel a certain way. She's also finally unburdening how she feels about her family. She's kind of speaking the truth. So there might be an element of exhilaration and giddiness that's coming with that. But I don't know as to her presentation. And the one thing that we were really careful always to do on the show is to never talk about what mental health conditions she might have. There have been so many rumours about what she has or hasn't been diagnosed with, what medication she is or isn't on. And we don't know that. And so I just don't like to comment on it.
It's so true because you can't tell from the outside by looking. You're right. It's completely speculative. All that you can do is observe a difference over time without knowing what that difference is caused by. You're 100% right. Do we know anything about her relationship with Kevin Federline and her boys?
I think she has a good relationship with Kevin Federline now. I mean, he was never involved in the conservatorship and has always said and gave a statement last week that, you know, he just wants her to be a healthy mother to his boys. So I think when he thought the conservatorship was a good thing, then he was happy for her to be in it. But obviously now that he knows, and lots of people say, oh, he must know, he must have known how she felt. But I think this has just shown how absolutely oppressed and terrified someone can feel. And again, you know, his experience of it, I don't really like when I hear criticism of him because he was young and she was young and they split up when they had 2 baby boys. And he will have probably been very worried about how unwell she was. So if her parents came along and said, we're going to make everything better, we're going to look after her, and you don't need to worry about anything, then, you know, a guy in his mid-20s is probably going to go, thank God. And the conservatorship is incredibly complicated. It's a conservatorship of her person and her estate.
What's the difference between those two things?
The estate is her money, and her person is the fact that she can't sign a contract. You can get conservatorships narrowly tailored if there is deemed to be a threat. So it could have actually been legal for them to refuse to allow her to have her contraception removed if they fought a case that it would be very dangerous for her to get pregnant. However, this is where it gets really sticky, because you have to question how on earth it actually became part of the narrowly tailored conservatorship. And she's also said that it then extended to ways in which make absolutely no sense and have no impact on anyone's lives, like her not being able to restain her kitchen cabinets. So yeah, basically the conservatorship of her person, conservatorship of her estate are separate. They can be tailored to be very constricting, which is what they have been.
Which one's her dad in charge of?
He oversees both.
Wow. I mean, that in itself is just so deeply messed up. The idea of your father, who you never really had a close relationship with, of a 40-year-old woman.
What makes him eligible as well? He's declared bankruptcy. He was an alcoholic for many years. I don't know what on earth would make him suitable to be the co-conservator of a $1 million upon $1 million estate. Kevin Federline recently said, you know, that if she wants to come out of the conservatorship, then he, of course, absolutely supports that. She's got a good relationship, by all accounts, with her boys now. And they are also teenagers now. And in 4 or 5 years, they will be 18. And there will be absolutely no legal need for anyone to set out how and when they can see their mother. Another thing that's important to remember is that Kevin Federline took out a restraining order against Jamie Spears. So he hasn't been able to see his children for the last couple of years after an incident. We don't know the details of the incident.
Do you mean his grandchildren?
Against his grandchildren, yeah. And lots of people have said, though, that's why she had the courage to come forward, because he no longer was kind of in control of her children in the same way. So the fact that Kevin Federline's taken out a restraining order against Jamie Spears would absolutely insinuate that they were not in cahoots about this, that he was not a massive fan of Jamie by any means. I think all he was a fan of was that he wanted to know that Britney was being taken care of. The very cynical people will also say that he allegedly receives $500,000 a year in child support, and that that's a motivation. But, you know, we don't know that.
How does this end, Pandora?
It's going to be years until this is settled. It's likely 2023 before they rule on this, because it will now almost be like a trial, I think. It's very, very likely that witnesses will be deposed, that Britney will have to give evidence. As I said, conservatorships are very difficult to get out of. So I think lots of different people will be called. And things move really slowly. The whole conservatorship has been sealed, except for that testimony a month ago, when Britney and her lawyer thought, quite rightly, that it would help for that to be made public. But everything from now on will be sealed again, which is quite normal. It's a really complicated legal contract that people are suddenly thinking or wanting to know absolutely everything about. For example, a couple of weeks ago, when it was revealed that a petition to have Jamie removed as her conservator had been rejected, everyone assumed that that was in response to her testimony on the 23rd of June and was in uproar. That was actually a ruling in response to a petition she'd made last year in 2020, which shows A, how slowly these legal things move, and B, that there's a lot of misinformation and everyone's quite hyper about it at the moment. And I think we need to slightly remember that there's so much we don't know, especially in the way these things work in court. And I think all anyone wants now is for her to be out of this conservatorship. I haven't spoken to anyone in the Free Britney movement who thinks she could just go back to a completely normal life with no support at all. If you haven't had a bank card for 13 years, the chances are you're going to need some support. But then most super famous people needs support. It's an extraordinary place to occupy in society. And we've heard from numerous pop stars, whether it's Billie Eilish, Demi Lovato, Taylor Swift, all speaking about the psychological pressure of being in the public eye. But I think what everyone's just thinking now, or most people are thinking now, is that there are so many ways to support someone outside of a conservatorship. But I think it could be years until a legal resolution is found.
And what do you think our cultural reappraisal of Britney Spears looks like now in 2021?
I think it's quite interesting with Britney because she's been propelled back into the spotlight. Yes, because she's in this awful conservatorship that she doesn't want to be in, but also the public loves an underdog. And at the moment they're seeing Britney as, yet again, I kind of believe that knowingly or unknowingly in the public eye, we tend to build women up. And when they get to a certain point, we tear them down. And so part of me wonders if this is the building up of Britney again that we did in the early noughties. I mean, I hope to God that she doesn't get torn down again. She certainly does not deserve that for a second time because her reputation has kind of waxed and waned. You know, she was very cool at the beginning. She was kind of uncool in the Vegas years. There wasn't a huge amount of attention on her. And now she's become sort of cool again.
Yeah.
And I'm not entirely cynical about that, but I do think we need to be aware of how we decide who our sort of queens are at a certain time.
I hope you loved that as much as I did. I could have sat and spoken to Pandora for hours. We were only meant to talk for about 45 minutes because her children were like out of the house while she recorded. And we went way over. We almost did talk for hours because there was just so much to cover. So if you haven't yet listened to Pieces of Britney and you want to hear more of her story, please do. You can find it in your podcast app now. And if you're after something else to listen to, go and follow our new podcast called Cancelled, which launches this week. It's hosted by Claire and Jessie Stevens, and it is a show about celebrities in Hollywood, all about who's in, who's out, and who cares. And the first episode, it's very funny. Even though they deal with some serious topics, it's very funny. The first episode is actually all about the cancellation of Justin Timberlake, and it is very Britney adjacent.
His crimes were being young, followed by being ignorant and exploiting at times Britney Spears. Then it came to Janet Jackson, and honestly, he didn't stand up for her enough. And then it got to Kylie. Honestly, you lost me there. So I'm going to leave the charges there with Kylie.
Look, the question is always beyond a reasonable doubt. And
beyond a reasonable doubt, he's a straight white man. I've said that all along.
Exactly.
So he's guilty of that. But most importantly, my sentencing. I sentence Justin Randall Timberlake to 2.5 bad albums. They're going to be badly written, badly executed, and they're going to sell badly.
I can't recommend this show highly enough. It's called Cancelled. We'll put a link in the show notes, or you can find it in your podcast app. The assistant producer of No Filter is Lucy Neville, and the executive producer is Eliza Ratliff. I'm Mia Friedman, and I'll see you on the Mamamia app.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this podcast on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures.